So hello everyone, and thank you for coming to this fourth seminar of traditional boats and maritime traditions. We are very happy to have with us today Alison Neilson, who is working at the Interdisciplinary Center for Social Sciences at NOVA University of Lisbon. Today, this is going to talk to us about a very interesting subject, boats are people too, visions from the Azores. So Alison, thank you very much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I really appreciate it. I am not actually at the moment in the Azores, and I'm not even in Lisbon where my contract is, but I am sitting at home in Coimbra. So I use various arts and narrative research methods for research and for communications and for teaching. So I'm going to begin by setting the stage of how I got to the Azores, and then also to invite you to the Azores with me. So I am going to share my screen to put up this one image. Okay. Okay, and I'm going to invite you to listen to a bit of a narrative and then some instructions. This is from my research journals. I am standing in line waiting to describe my baggage. Apparently, it arrived, but was too heavy for the small plane from my first island stop to Terceira Island, my final destination. My new boss rescues me by giving her address for delivery of my wayward bags. We drive to her home. Greens and browns color the moistened ground. Fences of piled rocks segregate patches of green along the hilly landscape. Some patches contain 4 or 5 cows. Others are empty, save the hanging wisps of fog. Cobblestoned roads rattle the jeep as we enter the small city. Ceramic tiles with images of saints and Mary and baby Jesus peer at me from every whitewashed building. Clay-tiled roofs, palm trees, chapels on every corner, images and symbols of the Catholic Church envelope me as I fall asleep in my new home. This is from a bit later. While traveling the islands, I will sit in Casas do Povo, community centers, and hear elderly women tell how the sea can be angry and have a need to take a human life, and how certain saints have protected communities from the hunger of the sea or from the volcanoes. Former whalers and fishers will speak from deep knowledge of the ways of the sperm whale and how reading the signs of the ocean, as well as the local priest blessing their boat, are important to successful and safe fishing trips. I realize that not only have I encountered exotic plants in the seemingly remote archipelago, I have seen rituals and symbols of belief that, while unfamiliar to me, are in fact as indigenous to the culture and place as one can get on land first inhabited less than 6 centuries ago, and which for a time was an important crossroads between Europe and the Americas. So now I'm going to guide you into a more full entrance into the islands. So I invite you to make yourself very comfortable. Make sure your body is in a relaxed position with your feet on the floor and your back resting against the back of the chair. Begin breathing very slowly from your stomach. Place your hands and feel your stomach rising and falling with each breath. As you breathe in, allow your abdomen to rise, and as you breathe out, let it fall. Focus all your attention on your breathing. Allow it to be slow and deep. Now close your eyes and continue to breathe slowly and remain relaxed as you focus on my voice. Imagine someone you love and trust calling to you, holding out their hand for you to join them. You follow and find yourself standing on a wild, rocky shore of the ocean. You look out and the sea goes on and on forever. You feel the warmth of the sun on your back, the breeze that eases the intense humidity of the air. It feels so good. You notice the black volcanic rocks and the dark green-blue waves lapping at surfaces which endlessly flow between the amorphous worlds of sea and land. You see the sparkle of this place brimming with life. You feel safe listening to the rhythmic sounds of the soft waves. The sound goes on and on. White foam gently laughing as it caresses the black rocks and tickles the limpets and the small crabs and your toes. Your body, your stomach are aware of the immense power of this place. As you notice your feelings of awe, you slowly notice that you are not alone. There is laughter and excitement all around you. Suddenly, you are aware of the strong smell of fish, fresh but pungent among the salt air. There is a swirl of men and women feeding of these beautiful creatures not long ago swimming not far from this shore. Someone calls you over to listen to his story of being with his father in a small wooden boat long ago, long before cell phones. He shows you with pride the red boca negra fish that he caught early this morning. He has tears in his eyes among his smile as he tells you how much he misses his father. You can see with your heart the love and respect that is being shown to these little sea creatures, who will now feed the bodies and hearts and lives of all these people gathered. You remember this feeling as later you sit amongst these new friends and enjoy the steaming soup being shared in the summer festival. It's tasty. Your mouth is watering. I invite you to open your eyes and return to the seminar space, bringing the warmth and laughter and yummy tastes with you. And now, okay, you can see the slides.
We can still see the picture.
Oh, you can still see the picture. Okay,
Yeah.
maybe I have to stop sharing and start sharing again. Share. Now you got it?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, here we go. So now that we're here in the Azores, I will speak a bit about actually not just about boats, but about the traditions that are connected with the boats and the people of the Azores. So in case, we'll just set where we are. The Azores are an archipelago of 9 islands, pretty much smack in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. They're on 3 continental plates, so they're volcanic islands. So this work that I'm going to speak about, I've been working in the Azores for 15 years and have been doing various projects, always based on trying to discover and help collaborate and bring to the forefront the perspectives, the ways of knowing, the lifestyles of the people who live in the islands. So since there's been many projects, and many of the projects haven't been strictly research based projects, I'm going to speak a bit about why I do some of this work and about a book project that's related to it. So I'll be a bit here and a bit there. I think I can keep within time, and then we can speak about, however, but I'll try to stay focused since there's so many things that I could speak about. So, as I said, a lot of the work that I engaged in has been done in collaboration with fishing associations, with women's associations, with other researchers, and with fishers themselves. And so this in 2011, we brought fishers together from all the 9 islands because there seemed to be a lack of opportunity for them to speak with one another and talk about their issues. And actually, I see we've got Kirsten here, who also came to this workshop in 2011. Yeah, so it's nice to see her here. So, and I think the basis of a lot of the work that I've been involved in the Azores has to do with how questioning and trying to move forward around what is heard, what is seen, what is remembered from research, but also from just sort of community stories, media stories. So, for instance, this image of this photo of this woman fixing a net in the islands, I showed at a seminar in Lisbon a bunch of years ago to other researchers who work with small-scale fishers in Portugal, primarily in the continent, not in the Azores. And I asked them what they saw in this photo. And even amongst this group of people who, are very attuned to small-scale fishing communities, they said that they saw poverty. And because, she's barefoot, even though if you look closely, her sandals are behind her and she's standing in the beach, and about her clothes, even though she's working. So it really goes to show that we have these strong ideas that are always influencing what research we do, what policies we make. They could have seen women, they could have seen family, they sort of could have seen community, but poverty came up. And this is connected also with how in Portugal, the continental Portugal often sees the Azores. The islands are far away, so there are these often myths about the islands. Also, when you think about fishing and the underlying narratives of fishing, we have global narratives about fishers being poor, but also within Portugal, fishing had a very strong connection with the dictator who really valued rural populations, rural way of life, and fishing as a way of life. And then after the dictatorship, there is also some of this idea of having to rescue these fishers from the dictator, trying to force them into just being fishers. So it's even more complicated than the general let's rescue fishing people and let's educate them. As we all know, many of the policies that dictate how fishing is around the world is often based on biological and economic models, often ignores many of the social aspects. Also, the islands are very small. There's not that many people. So the biologists who work in fisheries in the Azores also then become the people in government who are making the decisions and then about fisheries. And then even some of them that have been in the islands being secretaries of fisheries have then gone on to Brussels or gone on to fisheries in Portugal. So there's this really strong connection of, natural sciences that's apolitical and, all that stuff. So in the Azores, all the fishing is small scale or artisanal. Like many places, the fishing communities aren't really that well served from education. Although this is maybe a bit of not really exaggeration, but it's not, just strictly they either drop out or become educated to leave the fishing community, but there's a tendency towards that. And then also at the moment, that fish is becoming very unaffordable for people within the Azores, which again, I think is not a story that's necessarily unique in the Azores, but has come up, it was the headlines of a newspaper in February of 2021. So one of the issues or one of the things that as a social scientist, I come across often working in education, often always sort of critiquing and saying, the ocean isn't empty. We are nature, we are the ocean. The quotes, the interviews with fishers are clearly showing how they have this connection. We know that there's history in the ocean. There's political jurisdictions. There's underwater cables. There's peoples that made the crossings on slave boats. There's a lot of stuff in the ocean. It has history, and I think particularly when we work with small scale and artisanal fishers, you really see how they're often speaking about their concern about fishing and the fish, and they're really not enemies of the sea. So in 2016, a group of us came together looking at social inclusion and what we could do to improve. What were the issues and what were some of the things that we could perhaps do around the fishing communities? And these pictures are folks that are the head of women's associations, of the fishing association on all the islands. This was a project funded by this EEA grant. So we had Niels from Iceland and oh, I can't think of his name, and somebody from Spain. His name I know, but it's just, sorry. And in this meeting, one of the things that came up really was that the fishing community isn't seen. They're not seen in tourism brochures. They're not seen in media. They're just not seen anywhere. And so I had been thinking about putting together an academic book for some time, but instead from this project decided that it made sense to put together a book based on the academic research, but for a public audience, and to try to overcome these things by showing these other stories, telling them, showing the pictures for the Azorians to see themselves, for Portuguese to see the Azorians, and also for other people to really see small-scale fishing communities that are still existing. They may be struggling, but they're still very much alive and wanting to continue their way of life. So the principles of the book are that, although in the collaboration with everybody, I was leading it to the best that I could, try to put the local voices in the center. So there are the names of every single person in the photos. Every photo, there's 300 and some photos, the names of the people, the names of their boats, the names of their gear or their fish, in accessible language, both Portuguese and English, and using somewhat of a creative approach so that it was something that could be fully understandable. The other main driving principles was to have it not just be a book about the Azores for Azorean audience or Portuguese audience, but to try to share the stories and the photos in a way that we all could identify with the narratives. So that if you saw a picture about a mother and her son preparing gear together, you could identify with being with your parents doing something, even if it was away from the sea. But you could identify. It's not an exotic thing. Those people out there. It's mothers and sons, fathers and daughters. The other thing was to try to put reflective questions. So as a researcher, using social sciences, critical social scientists, of course, I have strong political and academic ideas about things. So to the best of my ability, was trying to put questions, not assuming that when people thought about fishing communities, they thought about a poor person or whatever. Just ask them, what do they think? Yeah, and to use things like contrasting photos. So this one picture is a painting of old fishers from one of the main fishing villages on San Miguel, and then the women are from another fishing village. And although the men are on the land right there, that picture, you usually think about fishing on the water, although fishing a lot is done on the land. Also, again, trying for the reader to reflect on how they might influence the vision of others. So that if you do a talk about the ocean, do you just face empty water, or do you look at the fishing port when you're thinking about the water? And so the idea was to try to, serve justice, blue justice, by showing people being, safe in the water. These men have life jackets on, even though there's quite an idea that fishermen don't wear life jackets and they're always drowning. Of course, this sometimes happens, and also people do drown. But trying to overcome that stereotype. These are some of the titles of sections of the book. And the idea is trying to come up to share other phrases, not just, the ocean is empty, but that, boats are people too. One of the things that drew me into your seminar series was learning about these boats being destroyed through the various policies. In the Azores, and the work that I've done, a lot of that has been hard to find, because many of them were destroyed, or they got destroyed before I saw them, before other people saw them. So I think it was Niels from Iceland who, in our meetings in 2016, said, well, boats are kind of like people too, because as probably the same in other places, they're often named after people. They've saved people's lives. They've been important for feeding them. There's things about the names being good luck. And then you have to leave, or you decide to leave and take some sort of a payout from policy to reduce the fishing fleet, and you have to kill it. You have to break it. A farmer who leaves their farm, they don't necessarily have to burn down their barn or kill their cows. It's pretty brutal. I like that you said that perhaps the next talk in January is all hands on deck, because that was an idea too, that, this picture here of George, he's a fisher, he's a boat owner, but he's very involved in doing research. This is a picture where he brought biologists on board to do various studies. He's parts of associations and various political actions. Everybody needs to be part of our understanding of the ocean and ocean futures. I just wanted to show in the book all the different collaborators and support. Also, we pulled from other books that had been published. The Women's Association had done 2 really important studies, or I guess a continuation study, in 2016 about women being invisible in fisheries. And they did research and they published these books, but they're in Portuguese, and they're pretty much only available in the Azores. So we took excerpts from them and then put information about how to find them, so that if somebody could know about them and could then at least begin to find the original work as well. This is just some of the underlying ideas about knowledge, and it's how we create it. I'm not going to say more about that. That was just to throw some academic things in. And yeah, that's all I wanted to speak about. The book is, it's a big book, actually. Oh, I'm sharing my screen, so can't help, but it's it's a non-profit project. It's still for sale. We created the book and put it in all the schools and libraries, and we've been working on education projects like that guided imagery, so that teachers could use the book in schools. I've got a Portuguese version, and then they can do things like I think that's the end. They can do things like take a picture from the book. So the book is actually quite large, and have the kids write stories, or have the children do things like go and interview their parents, their local community. And yeah, so that's this, you know, the story of the book, see, because I keep on hearing, I would say, you know, these stories about fishing communities in many parts of the world, and we talk about them in academia, and of course that's important, but then we still often see media portraying fishers in a certain way, or small scale fishers, and you know, really these communities, you know, these boats that they work on, these are still they're still useful. They're probably the best thing for when you think of sustainability. You know, we sometimes think about or we think about, you know, having to reduce and reuse and blah 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 blah, but around much work, I don't think we necessarily think about, wow, these traditional vessels are often very well suited, as long as we can also, you know, help make modern improvements for safety, but that the wooden boat, particularly a wooden open boat, has a use moving forward of just having people slow down and catch fish in a slow way. I mean, of course, there's huge other issues around that, but I think we need to have that vision that could be a possible future. Then, you know, what does that mean for how we can allow the fish to be caught in these ways, to allow all these communities to exist?
Thank you very much, Alison. That's absolutely great, and it's wonderful that you have this approach, and the book is very useful. And I totally agree with your approach and focus towards these communities. Today I was actually teaching a class, and we're discussing exactly that, how we can bring back maritimity. We have this word maritimity that we use in maritime archaeology to a lot of islands and coastal places that they have lost it just because of the fast modern ways of living have basically removed that. Like, they have removed these maritime types of livelihoods that existed there, and they have forced, I think you said that, like a more continental view and a more continental type of living. And when you go back to the older, more maritime, either economy or activities, they might be considered almost as you mentioned, poor or like lower than the standard of living that there should be around. But in fact, these ways of living are what has sustained lives in those places for thousands of years. And it is what you said, like it's a good opportunity for sustainability and for slowing down and actually seeing things differently.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting. I should have maybe focused a bit more on it, thinking about some of the boats, but in the islands, I don't have a picture of it, but there's their former whaling boats are these big wooden boats with big sails. And when whaling was, well, before Portugal joined the EU, the whaling was already starting to slow down. They only ever whaled sperm whale, but the use of sperm whale oil and everything else was, you know, was the world was stopping using. So it had been a tradition, had been a activity that was already starting to reduce. And then when Portugal joined the EU, they had to ban whaling as part of being part of the EU. So then that completely stopped. And so all these old whaling boats, a lot of them went into ruins. And then over, you know, this is in the 80s, there's been all EEA European funds to rebuild these boats. So now these boats are rebuilt. They are used in regattas. They're beautiful. There's all these books and about how important these boats are, and the former whalers. There's still some of them left. They've become part of the whale watching industry because they can spot the whales. But the fishing boats, like I can see it, it's like there isn't this forethought of like, okay, if we're not going to fish on some of these boats, perhaps we could use them for tourism, or I mean, they also have value besides the family community value. But they still are. I saw a video of a boat being chainsawed and ripped apart, and I'm sure that, well, I'm not 100% certain, but it makes sense that you could have some nice tourism that valued the boats, and then you're going to have to rebuild them. And like, why not prevent them from being destroyed in the first place?
Yeah, totally. And this is the problem that exists in Greece too, that these boats are removed to remove basically the fishing license, but the boats do not have to be destroyed under any circumstances. And there's so many functions for these boats, and you said like tourism, but even like small scale transport between islands that existed in the past but doesn't exist now anymore, and so many other things that would be extremely useful to have those watercraft for in any way. But because I don't want to be talking alone, does anyone have any questions or comments for Alison so that we can continue the discussion?
I would like to ask something. Well, first of all, I would like to ask if there is any boat building activity on the islands on the Azores Islands, boat building, shipbuilding,
right?
Activity, and yeah.
I know I'm not 100% of the exact status of it at the moment. I know in two islands that had been important for building boats, there had been some retraining for building boats. I'm not exactly certain what happened, particularly just before COVID, because of COVID stuff, but it's not as much as there used to be. I mean, one of the things is there used to be a lot of boat activity between islands, not just fishing, but a lot of transportation and recreational and like these big sort of taxi boats. And they used to be built. There was two main shipbuilding, but not as much probably as there was, of course, because they were focused on wooden boats.
And the second question is, when was the last time that they destroyed fishing boats with the EU regulations?
Yeah, I had a hard time finding about this because I was asking people and nobody was, but I found a video in 2016, I think, showing somebody taking a chainsaw to the boat. Now, because I've had a hard time finding it, I'm not 100% certain. I mean, I don't know why you would cut it in half if you didn't need to. There's quite a few boats that have been they've just rotted, and I've seen them taking bulldozers, but I'm not 100% certain if that's destroying the boat because they needed to for policy stuff, or which is okay, this was a garbage that they were destroying. But it's they've been reducing the fleet. Portugal's been reducing, and the Azores have been reducing the fleet, so there's just a lot of boats that are just taken out of activity. I was quite surprised because I had learned about it from Greek examples. I had no idea, and I was expecting, once I started asking, that people would tell me about it or people would remember. because I just thought it's such a traumatic thing to have to destroy your boat. But I didn't do, I did a kind of a casual research on it. I didn't do a full actual research to find it.
And how many, do you have any estimation how many fishing boats are now exist in Azores? I mean,
I do. I can't tell you off the top of my head because I haven't been, let me think if I can.
I mean, roughly it is.
Right. Well, see, the thing is the Azores, the fishing fleet is very different. So there's 9 islands and they have, 2 of the islands have a very community-based type of fishing, so that they're going out doing long lines. I mean, they're small long lines, but they're long line fishing using these gamelas. So you have women and other people on the ground preparing them. You'll have a boat supporting, a family with lots of cousins. So they're often those economies that they're poorer. But then you have tuna boats. And then on other islands, it's pretty much a middle-class existence where you have, a boat and it's owned by somebody who's probably a part-time fisher, and they have 1 or 2 people working for them. So on those small islands, I mean, when I say small islands, this one island has 300 people on it and has 2 active fishers. And I don't think those 2 are actually full-time. And then, like I said, that the tuna boats are the bigger boats, and they're the ones that are bigger businesses. They're still small scale. They're doing 1 by 1 tuna, but they're still going out for, some weeks to catch tuna. So it's a bit of a mix. I'm sorry, I numbers, I haven't been speaking about numbers recently, so I'm not good at, a lot of the communities had 1 or 2 boats. So Terceira Island, which is an island 24 by 17 kilometers, the one fishing port that might have had 10 boats in the past has maybe 1 that goes out from there now. Yeah, I mean, there's.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you very much.
Since you were mentioning the fleet and the reduction of the fleet, I wanted to ask, in the policy of reducing the fleet, do they focus on the small scale fishers to reduce the numbers, or do they do similar reductions in bigger businesses? Because to me, I haven't looked at numbers, or I haven't found any official things yet, because I haven't researched that bit yet. But in Greece, it seems almost that they find the easy way to reduce numbers with the small fishers and the small boats, rather than actually making a policy of, for example, subsidizing a few months of fishing when the fish are reproducing and are needed to be left alone, to do any other measures rather than removing just like boats just because the numbers will go down. Is there any different policy in Portugal in terms of reducing both small fishers and bigger businesses?
Right. Well, fisheries in Portugal is a bit complicated by the fact that the Azores are a semi-autonomous zone.
Right. Yeah.
So they have some autonomy over fisheries. I mean, before they joined the EU, they had full autonomy, but then they are, a regional, regional government. So in the islands themselves, it's only small scale for them to reduce. I mean, they're always fighting with Lisbon, with the continent, to try to maintain, as much of the national quota of different fisheries as possible, but they really only have in the Azores the small scale to reduce. And there's constantly talk about having less people, less boats, less people. I don't hear any discussion about having the fishery support more people. I mean, because of course, you don't want to increase. I mean, there's the seasons. I'm always getting notices about, a fishery being closed, the quota's closed, or it's just closed because, there's not as much fish out there. And the fishers are always saying that. And they're also, deciding not always to go out if it's not worth their while. But it's around reducing, not making it support. And then on the continent, there's fewer small scale fisheries, and I think they have less power. Some of the small scale fisheries on the continent, though, are also a bit more complicated because they use this dragging method, the shavagat. I don't know what it's called, what are the other names for it, but where they take the net out and they basically drag everything to the beach. So that fishery is really a difficult one to talk about looking after fish, and it's really, from what I understand, it only exists on a very artisanal, almost touristy thing. There's not a lot of people that do that on the continent. Mm-hmm. And there's some other small scale stuff, but we also have a huge fleet, or had a big industrial fleet.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think as like researchers of looking at this sort of stuff, traditions and fishing and traditional boats, I think one thing that we could put pressure somehow is to try to not just reduce numbers, but like to have more almost qualitative choices of like what is reduced or what is almost like changed, like, because I think like it could be that there's support for fishers to sit out on land for a few months, just to allow the sea and the fish to to become more in a sense, and like have some sort of different way of managing the ecosystems. It's not just about numbers, and I think from the social sciences perspective, we can give that pressure a little bit more, that people like are depending on it, and there's ways of supporting them and preserving, especially the artisanal and the small fishers, for these purposes. But yeah,
there's policies around fishing, getting more pay for the fish. Mm-hmm. So, the tuna fisheries is a good example because mm-hmm. it's really marketed as this, 1-by-1 tuna fisheries. But because the islands are so far away, some of the things like the originally learned from the Danish examples that, there is examples where people are working on the fish and making sure it's really, really high quality so that you get a higher value for it. Mm-hmm. But you have to fly the fish from the islands if you're going to get a European or Japanese or whatever selling it and getting a higher. So you have that extra time and cost, and then, okay, you can sell it so that the restaurants have higher quality, but then the cost of fish goes up, and then you have, this issue of the fishing communities or the other people in the Azores not necessarily be able to afford fishing, afford to buy fish, or even the fishing families deciding to sell all the fish and not even keeping that much for themselves to eat because of the cost going up. So it's it's been a bit complicated. They overcame some of the flight issues. A bunch of years ago, there were problems with them not being able to get enough space on the aircrafts to fly the fish off the islands. And, of course, if you don't fly fresh fish, the value goes down. That seems to be much better. But then also, as you get more tourism, the whole thing around tourism in the islands, there's not, I don't see a lot of tourism that they try to think about how to integrate with the fishing communities. It's just, you can just see tourism ends up going to be in conflict because, fishing ports might smell a bit, or, they take up the nice spot where you want your leisure boat or whatever. So, you don't have major conflicts at the moment, but I really don't see a lot of innovative thinking. And the fishing communities they had some nice ideas of tourism, but it's been tough, with the economy taking a downturn in 2011, and then with COVID, it's all, I think there's a ton of potential. I think there's a ton of potential, and the fishing communities themselves, I think, are the ones to be able to take the leadership. And that's why I think trying to highlight the community as important people who should be supported and being part of decision making and encouraged to take the leadership in tourism ventures and supported fully, in that they get whatever grants they get. The government it doesn't take over what they're doing. It's the people who have the boats. There was a small scale fishing tourism that was started and tried. The Women's Association helped get the law changed and get insurance so that tourists could go on artisanal small scale boats. But it's just a really tough tourism because they're competing against whale watch tourism that's really very professional. They have the language. They can pretty much guarantee that they'll go out on these certain days. And that really didn't fit very well in the culture of fishing. So, but it was, a great example of, okay, how can the community themselves take charge? And, I think there's a real potential for having fishing tourism on the land, have tourists seeing gear, doing some of that stuff, having people speak to them on the land. So it doesn't matter what the ocean's doing, and the weather, because, you're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The ocean is big. There's big weather. You have lots of times where you can't go out on a fishing boat.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as you said, the potential is there, and there could be a lot of things to be done on this subject. Does anyone else have a question for Alison or a comment? You can unmute your microphone or open your camera and participate in the discussion. No one? Okay. In that case, if no one has anything else to say, we would like to thank you, Alison, for this seminar. It was really great, and I think we are seeing that in more and more places around the world, there is this sort of potential to look at these small scale traditional businesses that either have to do with fishing or boat building, and that they do have the potential to be more active and more important in the society as we are trying to transform things for a more sustainable future. So hopefully we can put, as archaeologists, social scientists, and humanities researchers, put some more pressure on that. I think there is a comment from Siren saying thank you for this amazing session.
I just realized, I don't know why I didn't get this, but I have a link to the digital book. That I can put in the chat. Okay.
That would be great.
Sorry, that was a bit silly on my part that I didn't think of this. Okay, I have a link. Where is it? Okay, just bear with me. I just have to find the document. It won't take that long. Here's the link. Here. No. Confirmed in book. Final edition of book. Let's see for the light promotional. Okay, I am. Sorry, there's so many different. I have so many different files. This was silly that I did not. Okay, I can email it to you because I know as soon as we finish here, I will find it. But I'm having a bit of a
no problem, and I can even post it on the program of the seminar series on the website for anyone.
Definitely, because the whole book I've got a PDF version, and so it's free for everybody. But
okay, perfect. Yeah, so I'll just post it under your name in the program for anyone who's interested. That sounds great. Thank you again for the presentation. It was really great to hear about the Azores, and it was really nice to see you. The next seminar is probably going to be on the 18th of January, and I will keep the program updated possibly in a couple of weeks when we have all of the details for the new year. So
thank you, Alison. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and bye. See you.
See you.